Everyone, and welcome to an episode of Grow and Tell. I am your host, Erin Lapsansky, and I am joined today by Tawnie Scarborough of Conception Nurseries. So, welcome, Tawnie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Erin.
Of course, Tawnie is the Vice President of Corporate Development at Conception Nurseries. They are a tissue culture lab, a cannabis genetic library. They offer TrueClones, which is a trademarked insignia. They reduce cultivars, operational risk, loss, and costs, and things like that. Oh, for cultivators, I apologize. I was clearly reading that. They reduce cultivators' chance of loss and cost when it comes to bringing in bad clones and things like that. So they hold on to clean and consistent genetics for various brands, cultivators, other people in California, right? That's where you're based?
Yep.
Cool. So today we're going to talk about the breeders that they have or that they're working with at Conception Nurseries. We're going to talk about the global supply chain, just of cannabis plants in general, tissue culture in general, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and certified genetics, which is somewhat of a new idea as far as my exposure to the concept. But Tawnie, is there anything I missed? Do you mind giving us like a 2-minute background spiel, things like that, so we just get to know you?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. So I've been in cannabis at a commercial scale since 2002. At that point, here in Northern California, that was back in Prop 215 days when 99 plants was like the safety zone. If you're trying to avoid helicopters coming in. And at that point, we were working 80 acres and had multiple, 99 plant patches across the property, but working within the framework and kind of limited guidelines that came with Prop 215, being able to provide medical marijuana to patients. This is a time where you couldn't be compensated for your work. You couldn't be paid for your flower, but you could be compensated for what you've invested in creating it to be able to donate it to the clubs. So completely different, world at that time. And raising 2 daughters on the land with solar and growing our own food, I really wanted to be able to have an opportunity to live a normal life while still growing medicine. And so that got me involved in local and state politics. And I founded the Sonoma County Growers Alliance back in 2015 when we saw some momentum in the state. Worked with a amazing team of advocates across California, trying to make sure that the existing marketplace, all of the operators that had built this dynamic commercial market under Prop 215, had an opportunity to have licenses in the future. So we worked with the state government on MMRSA, fought Prop 64. I will withhold explicitives here on Prop 64. Joined Cal Growers, which is the largest dues-paying membership and largest trade association representing legacy operators in the country, and joined the team to kind of undo the damage as much as possible within Prop 64 and work with regulatory agencies. And the whole state got screwed. Richard Parrott came in, became director of the cannabis division of CDFA and allowed for the stacking of licenses. And that was really the beginning of what we're all experiencing here in California 5 years later, is the deterioration of a balanced marketplace that gives legacy operators the opportunity to build their businesses. So I was in Cal Growers for 3 years and then got into the private sector and started working with different groups across the supply chain. That has brought me here to Conception today.
Wonderful. Yeah, that is a background of a lot of advocacy. So thank you for that.
No.
I think, like it's regulation work isn't the flashiest or showiest work. So it's really cool that you're.
No, it's actually kind of a little soul sucking because you really get to see what drives political decisions. But I will say that in that earlier in 2015, working with, folks like Senator McGuire and Jim Wood, they really did, write policy for the right reasons. When I met Jim Wood, he said, I will work with all of you on this, but it's not because I support cannabis. It's because I want to protect our waters. And,
Oh,
he's been authentic and driven in that regard the entire time. And I think McGuire understood the tax benefits, but he's a great businessman. He understood that converting, this market into a regulated market was going to make a lot of changes for public safety as well. So,
yeah.
there's a few gems out there, but it's
Yeah,
mostly good.
for sure. And what the more cooks in the kitchen, the more opportunity there is for a mess, right? So
Yes.
that's just where
Yep.
we're getting with that. But was there something about Conception specifically that you want, like, aligned with your values or anything like that? Like, what if I'm going private and like now I'm working for these people? Why Conception?
Sure. So,
Yeah.
funny story. I actually was trying to get out of cannabis after all those years. I'd started to lose my passion for it because I was watching this kind of corporate takeover happening in California. It's like, okay, there's plenty of opportunity to do something else in my life. And I was in at the tail end of a highly competitive application for an executive role with this global nonprofit. And I get this call one day from a recruiter. He's like, "Hey, Tawnie, I saw your profile on LinkedIn. I think you're a perfect fit for this company." I was like, "Oh, I thought you were my doctor. I have to go." Click. And he calls back and he leaves this like voicemail, and then he finds me on LinkedIn and leaves me an email. He's like, "No, I'm looking for you specifically. Please call me back." I was like, "Oh God." I talk with my husband, like, I don't want to answer. And like, so I take the call and he tells me about this nursery, and I kind of laugh, like, nursery. I've been all throughout the supply chain. Like, in my
Hmm.
head, nursery is not big enough of,
Hmm.
for what I want to do in the world. And he's like, just come see the lab, come meet the people. And
Yeah.
okay, so I come out and I drive out to Sacramento and I walk this lab and I meet this team and I see it. Like, there's this drive, there's this passion, there's this pursuit of excellence. They are trying to achieve the impossible, and in fact, they've just achieved the impossible. They had, at this point, been able to produce up to 250,000 clones in a single month. They had an average of 100,000 clones month over month. Nobody's ever done this in the world for
Wow.
cannabis. And the lab is clean and beautiful, and the
Mhm.
COO is Six Sigma black belt. And I was like, it's like a pack of wolves I can run with. And so they got me because, ultimately that's what I wanted, was pursuit of excellence
Mhm.
and something to be passionate about. And we didn't really know what my role was going to be.
Mhm.
They were hiring for a different role, and I ended up sitting down with the executive team, and we talked for at least an hour all together and about, what this platform could do in the world. And so I joined, and I think it's safe to say I basically joined for business development.
Cool. Cool. No, that's awesome. I mean, it sounds like they can really benefit from everything, like all of your experience and your level-headedness. I mean, you're doing amazing on this podcast already. So,
Yeah, and likewise, I think the whole industry benefits from what tissue culture provides, and
Mhm.
Conception is a part of that story. It's a part of the solution. It's not the first tissue culture lab in the world. It was the first one to crack that code on scale
Mhm.
and efficiencies of operations. But there's those who have come before Conception, right? And there's some really fundamental key players in the marketplace who had the vision to bring tissue culture to the forefront, and we needed it. And
Mhm.
had they not been there, this may not never have come to fruition. So I
Yeah.
actually think that the tissue culture nursery community collectively is providing a key solution for the global cannabis community because, as I'm sure you've seen in the headlines, there's hop latent viroid, but there's also a suite of other pathogens that are solvable and can
Mhm.
be easily removed through tissue culture and prevented.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it is the future, and it's a little scary because you're blending the like salty old sea of the medical marijuana market with like the new commercial cannabis market, and
Mhm.
sometimes you have a lot of resistance with new tech. But I think over time it will continue to prove itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to say, like, I perused the website a little bit and looked at the pictures of the facility. And if our viewers have not had a chance to do that, they absolutely should, because they are gorgeous. The
Yeah.
facility is just very clean, which we all know from an integrated pest management perspective. That's literally your first step. Just make your
Yep.
facility clean, right? But more than that, it's like the plants look very healthy. And I have to say, I've looked at a lot of people's cannabis tissue culture plants, and they don't look as healthy as like, those are the healthiest ones I've ever seen. And I'll say that. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they
Yeah,
clearly have done a lot of media work and done a lot of research and development and done a lot of their, continued progress, like making progress, moving it forward. Not everybody else can make it look like that. So,
yeah,
yeah.
there's a commitment that Conception has had since its inception of 20% of the resources going to research and development. And I think that's really what's propelled the company forward.
Absolutely. And with the stock as healthy as it is, what puts you in a position to be able to, from what I read, not only supply mothers, which is what a lot of tissue culture people provide, as a mother stock, but actual flowering stock. So we're talking about a whole lot more, plants going out. And even more than that, I saw something about like an exclusive production line. Do you feel comfortable talking about those
Sure.
options at all? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah, I
cool.
mean,
Mhm.
the main business model for Conception is producing clones at scale, right?
Yeah.
So in that way, I think of Conception as just like this tissue culture clone factory, where there's so much that can be done, and I think this is why I've blended so well in with Conception's ethos. Is they are singularly focused on excellence in production of clean stock at scale.
Mhm.
And with that, it's kind of like having a record manufacturing company in the 50s, right? If you can produce the best sound on your records, you can be a contractor to every single record label company that exists. And so, there's Conception Nurseries library for the public, and the menu is constantly changing. And it's been a really fun ride. Today is actually my 2-year anniversary with Conception, and when I joined, um,
Congratulations. My
I don't
goodness.
I don't know if my CEO wants to hear this, but when I joined and I looked at the menu, I was like, "This is the cutest '90s mixtape of genetics I've seen, and we've got to get busy on bringing some new fresh stuff to the
Some
table."
Bubba, Sour Diesel,
Yeah,
like those ones.
Jack
Yeah, okay.
Herrera.
Yeah, slappers.
And so that was one of the first projects, and it's a lot of breeders are scared that their genetics are going to get stolen. One of the key things that Conception does is every single genetic that is presented to Conception, we get it genetically tested through a third party, through Medicinal Genomics, who have been an excellent business partner with us, and they, are providing a public platform. So, this allows an open dialogue about what these genetics are, what's really related. Anybody can call something sour diesel, but when you start to have, the markers of every single genetic submitted that's called sour diesel showing up in this certain area, and then once an outlier, now
Yeah.
there's some research to be done.
Okay,
Very
so
very similar to like ancestry.com and your lineage.
they're looking for specific markers. That's what ancestry.com does. It says, "Oh, that marker is correlated with either this region or it's correlated with whatever." But
Yeah.
your facility is doing it. Oh, that's correlated with these parents. That's
So
correlated with
we
that.
definitely use it to be able to kind of see what family it's falling into, but it doesn't matter because I mean, that looking at how there's not enough information yet
Yeah.
in the world
Okay.
for that data to have a significant
Yeah.
impact. What we're really looking at, we want to get the genetic test for the breeder.
Mhm.
Now they have this information that is timestamped in the blockchain. They have the ability to apply for a utility patent if they want to.
Mhm.
And now we're able to test for anytime we produce clones out into the world to see if it's a genetic match, if somebody's following our contracts or not.
Mhm.
But when it comes to selection from a breeder, they might present to us 20, 50, or 100 genetics. we put those genetics through performance trials, and this is a kind of exhaustive agronomic performance assessment from like lateral branching to environmental, sensitivities, bud set, nodal distance, number of vegetative days to hit a certain height, and flowering days to finish. We take all that data to, doesn't necessarily put it in or out of the runnings, because some people want short plants if they're running a 3-tier system, some people want tall. But then when we look at the finished flower, that's really where some of the selection begins to get more in depth, because there is commercial viability. And, what is commercially viable both for the wholesale market and the retail market. Retail is, brands like to get kind of weird and funky and like, have something that stands out and is loud and nuanced. Wholesale market tends to really want things that, like your Pepsi Cola kind of sales. So we're selecting for diversity, for marketability, but we also are looking for some of the weird outliers too. Like, we've had the great fortune of being able to contract with a farmer breeder who has created the highest blossoming terpene profile genetic in California, and they've won several awards. So bringing in nuanced genetics as well and putting it into tissue culture, it may not sell commercially for us today, but there's a lot of opportunity in the future, especially as more science, more studies come forward. You start to pair that entourage effect of cannabinoid profile with terpene profile and seeing medicinal properties. And as the market matures, these genetics, I think, are going to become more and more prominent, not only for maybe, cultivation or extracts, but also for breeding projects amongst the breeders in the future.
So that does kind of make a nice transition for me, because my goal, or at least my goal in cannabis, was always to work with a tissue culture lab on genetic modification. So since you are already doing the genetic sequencing and you already have tissue culture pretty much dialed, your only now, deviation is to make tumors and then genetically modify them, turn them back into plants. Is that in your,
Not at all.
Not at all. No. Okay.
No.
So can you explain why?
Yeah, I don't, like I said, I think Conception has this pursuit of excellence and is somewhat singularly focused on being able to be the tissue culture lab and, producer at scale. And that alone is, far more difficult than it sounds. Every single day. I mean, if you're working with hundreds of genetics and you have these media formulations that have to be, you're trying to achieve certain KPIs and the multiplication rate and proliferation, you want to, there's just so many layers of complexities to be able to work with hundreds of thousands, millions of tiny little shoots at various stages with QR codes on them that are, moving at different,
So
some
you
are
don't
for
want to
multiplication, some are for
distract.
rooting.
You gotta keep
It
straight
takes
ahead.
it takes everything we have just to continue. And so instead of trying to expand our business in the ag tech side into nuanced places, we're just going to expand the business into other territories. So is it enough to serve the California market? Absolutely not. The world wants the genetics and the breeders behind it, and we want to bring that to them. So, that's part of the work that I'm doing at Conception today, is bringing the tissue culture lab, bringing the mountain to the commercial markets across the US. So we're starting to expand into new territories. And, I think it takes about a year for our lab to be built and for our populations to be built. And by that time, we see these other markets maturing to a place where everybody's, buying clones from wherever they're getting it from. And then it usually comes with pathogens. Then they have to go through, destroying everything in their facility and starting over. And at that point, they understand the power and the need for clean genetics. And that's about the time that we're ready to bring it to market. So it's a really exciting time for Conception to just be doing one thing excellent.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's just always, what is the future? What is the next steps? That kind of thing. And it sounds like you're already working with some really cool breeders to bring in that new genetic
I had a lot of
information.
fun working with the breeders. I don't get to see him as much anymore because I'm out in the world so much. Christian Andreasen now heads up our product development team, and he's bringing in the breeders and building this next era of
Tell him to get
library.
some women in there, yeah?
I've been on the hunt. I'll just say this, like selfish plug. If there's a woman breeder out there, find me,
Yeah.
because it is hard to find. I actually teased Christian, like, I'm gonna become a breeder just so I can be the first female.
I used to tell, when I was teaching horticulture, I used to tell all of my students they should go into breeding, because everyone in breeding is a man who's getting old at this point. So let's go, flush them out.
It's an interesting thing, and it's also, it's interesting, like, what is a breeder, especially in this industry. Everything's a little bit looser and faster, right? And
Yeah.
I do think, though, while this analogy may be a little bit played out, it's there because it's so synonymous. But similar to the music industry, there was a time when music was freely shared, freely given, freely received. For a myriad of reasons, we made sound. And then there was a time in which people were finding a way to monetize, a beautiful voice or a skill set with a different instrument. And then it became commercial, with people investing and spending money to make it something special. And then they started to patent and protect. And we're seeing the same thing happen with cannabis. And it's kind of why we have to get ahead of it. Part of why we put the genetics into, the testing, is just to give the power back to the breeders. We can't change the past. If they've released their genetics freely into the market, probably, there's some big corporation out there who's got a utility patent in line waiting for, Schedule 1 to drop. But we can protect them in the future with what they're creating today, and making sure that they're the first ones to be time-stamped with the unique genetic.
Yeah, no, it's a really cool program, honestly. It's well, and I read as well that you're giving royalties to the breeders who are
Yes.
contributing to your menu. Yeah. So every time a clone, I assume, or every time a certain number of clones is sold with
Every
their
clone sold, they're
wow.
getting their royalty on it.
That's
And
awesome.
I hope that, in our pursuit of excellence, as the tissue culture and just nursery game gets more and more competitive,
Mhm.
that more nurseries compete with us in this place of good business practices, taking care of the breeders. They are the lifeline. They are the tastemakers. They are the blood of the industry supply chain. And if you're not paying the breeders, you're just taking their genetics and slinging them out there on the market as a nursery. To me, you're a little bit of a parasite to what is truly available to our entire marketplace. And I think these breeders win when the nurseries are competing for who can take care of them the most, right?
Yeah.
Similar to what we saw happen when Napster came to market, right? And it was like, whoa, all the songs are free to the people. And the people are like, yes, this is amazing, because it had gotten too restrictive,
Mhm.
and you couldn't get access to any music without somebody charging you a dime along the way.
Mhm.
But what it did was it just emptied out any revenue to be able to pay the artists. So I blame, the early 2000s tanked music industry. Like, name one good song that came out of 2000,
I
5
mean,
to
there's a lot of
2010.
ludicrous songs, but we don't have to.
But for the most part, the music industry was, kind of took a downturn. And I think it's because the artists weren't incentivized anymore. You got to take care of your artists. And when they are having to hand to mouth survive by, like, constantly breeding something new, the newest hypest thing, they're no longer breeding for something that's special and unique. They're just in polyhybrid, mode. And because that's the only way for them to survive due to the nature of the market. When you give them royalties and they can get weird again and find something nuanced that's never been done, and they know that that investment is going to come back to them in dividends over the next 5-10 years, now we're reinvesting in our collective future.
Mhm.
And I think that is kind of the game changer. Not that Conception is the first or only, nursery to pay royalties, but that this is a standard practice that needs to be adopted by all nurseries.
Yeah, and I'm sure, they appreciate the royalties, but I bet they also appreciate that you have created the platform for their genetics, right? I think a lot of cannabis professionals, whether it's dispensary managers or cultivation managers or whatever, we now
Yeah.
have the burden of doing a lot of our own marketing for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
breeders, especially if their only marketing opportunity is through Instagram or whatnot, then there's that, what you go back to earlier, what you said, dividing your attention. Breeders have to divide their attention. You're giving them a place where they don't
Yeah.
have to. So seems like a really chill place to work and to get to spread out your legacy. Really, that's what it becomes, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's good for everybody. I think
Yeah.
but especially the end consumer. What right now, when you buy something in the store, buy some you know, Skittles or Blue Dream or gelato. I mean, any big name that's well known,
Hmm.
you don't really know if that's the flower that you're getting in the jar. They
Hmm.
might just be using the name to increase sales because it's a highly trafficked name in
Hmm.
the market. And so by having that, genetic test and being able to validate all the way through to the consumer, we're getting one step closer to an increased consumer confidence as well as accuracy, right? So, what is it? Right now, for most consumers, buying flour in a jar is like playing roulette
Hmm.
because you never really know what you're going to get inside, right?
Hmm.
It's like, oh, I bought this Blue Dream and I painted the most beautiful mural, and they go back to buy the Blue Dream, but it's actually like, some OG cross that, with like purple punch or something, so it's got just enough color, whatever.
Yeah.
And they've called it Blue Dream, but now you're having a completely different effect. And the moment that we do this to the consumer, we're breaking down the confidence, that purchasing power and that reordering power that is actually takes care of everybody in the industry. So this like strain name game that final mile brands are using in order to sell, and even at the wholesale level to sell, uh, the cherry gelatos, just to get
Yeah.
the extra point. All we're doing is weakening the confidence of our consumer.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, well, actually, let me pose this as a question to you. So, in the conventional agriculture marketplace, if you want a premium product, then you have to pay a premium price for it. So, how do you think that consumers are going to feel about the fact that, I mean, if let's say that there is some kind of validation that either becomes required or becomes marketable, do you think people are going to be willing to pay that extra amount of money? How much money does it really cost to sequence a genome for a strain?
I mean, I think when you get down to the impact of the cost at the final mile and the price, per gram, you're not even talking about a penny in what the long term spread is for a genetic sequencing at the headwaters.
Hmm.
Because you're talking about hundreds of thousands of clones that have gone out to the market that are validated.
Hmm.
And I hope that it doesn't become required. I think that we live in a state of overregulation right now. And I strongly believe that, a kind of conscious and healthy, healthy competitive capitalist environment will actually drive the type of innovation for best performing, product at the most reasonable price.
Hmm.
But I don't think that that's going to impact. In fact, if you know exactly what you're growing and it has performance tests, the agronomic performance features of this genetic, then you're more likely to be successful in your production operations, which reduces your costs, which can make you more competitive at the final mile. So
Absolutely.
I think that
Yeah.
this type of, doing the work at the headwaters at a nursery level can make better efficiencies, potentially more revenue, and if nothing else, maintain a competitive price at the market.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting concept, really. My inclination is always, how do we, if we are requiring some kinds of quality assurance, like what other aspects can we assume or ask for? And, like you said, you never know what you buy in the jar. I don't even know if what the jar is actually matching what's on the label for testing, whether that's the right
Yeah.
percentage, whether that was the strain they ever sent in, whatever
Said
things
like
like
every
that.
consumer in New York.
Sure, yeah. It was basically, yeah. Didn't they say that New York was predominantly smoking Washington black market? I think that's what they said. I'm so it's like,
I think New York has been the cannabis industry's longest and largest consumer for decades, and
yeah.
they've definitely predominantly been smoking free people's weed for a very long time.
Yeah. So there's a lot of room for growth, is what we're saying.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
I think New York actually proves that there's a strong desire by consumers. I mean, there's a hustle
Mhm.
in New York right now where people are producing California COA labels. They're making them up, but they're
Yeah.
making, they're replicating a COA label because first there was weed coming to New York that was actually like coming,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
from
Mhm.
California, still had its COAs. Consumers were like, "Ooh, I can actually see the cannabinoid profile, and
Mhm.
this has been tested and it's clean because it
Yeah.
passed California standards." And capitalism is thriving, so people get innovative and they make labels up, and they're actually demanding a higher value if it's got the COA on it. So it's proving that the consumer market wants to know what's in the box,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You can choose whether or not to read the nutritional label on your box of Cheerios, totally your
Mhm.
choice. But if
Mhm.
they didn't have the nutritional value and the ingredients, you'd be suspect.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Well, yeah, I don't want to take too much of your time. I think we could talk about this for a very long time. I keep going like, oh, I think I can get one more question. But this has been really exceptionally fun. I think everybody who is going to tune in or has tuned in is going to learn a lot. I like to give you a little bit of space at the end of an interview. Is there anything that Conception is doing that we should mark our calendars for? Are there any big drops or anything like that? So go ahead and take the floor for free play, if you will. Of
Cool. Well, first I want to say thanks, Erin, for creating this.
course, yeah.
I think it is a potent thing. Women's voices in the cannabis industry. I know everybody's heard it a million times, but it'll need to be said another million or two. Which is, there is a commitment that women have to weaving the basket together, to networking and making sure that we see all things connected, have its highest potential.
Yeah.
It's a balance to men, generally speaking, being
Yeah.
very hyper focused. They're like a
Mhm.
train on the tracks and they drive to the destination, and that's a powerful tool and gift. But you also have to have a full peripheral view of obstacles and opportunities. So
It's not just one
thanks for
person running
lending
the
your voice.
train. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot going into a good train.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
And then for conception, yeah, we're doing some really cool stuff. It's been such a pleasure to get to work with Christian Andreessen, who joined our team for here in 2023, and is really taking the lead. It's so exciting to see what he's bringing to the table for the genetics. Like, basically, it takes a year from when we bring something new genetics in to where we're bringing them commercially to the market. So every single month we are bringing new genetics forward now. So it's a really fun time for conception to start to be a creative contributor to that world and be able to provide more opportunities and options for our customers. We've got some really interesting projects happening across the US. There's some great opportunities for conception in the EU. I'd say if there's people listening who are thinking about bringing tissue culture, if you're at scale and you want TC lab at scale in your state, give me a call. Find me on LinkedIn. But we don't spend a lot of time or money on marketing dollars and being out in the world. I think that the plants speak for themselves, and it's definitely a referral game. There's This industry has survived for decades by community members talking about what works, what doesn't work for them, and that's enough for us.
I love it. I love it. No, it's been great having you. I'm excited. I'm going to start watching for the monthly pheno drops. That's so cool. I'm excited.
Yeah.
If you ever enter into the Washington State market, I hope you hit me up. I want to come tour. I want to see all the stuff.
Yes.
Maybe I'll go to California, but that's less likely. Everybody always
You
goes,
might have
come
to come
down
to
to
California.
California.
Washington market's a
Oh,
little slow right now.
yeah, it is. That's true. Yeah, there's a lot going on. It'll be
Yeah.
fine. We'll figure it out. Yes. Well, to everyone who signed in, everybody who is watching later on, thank you so much. Like Tawnie said, reach out to her if you have more questions about this kind of thing. Their website is really beautiful. There's a lot of information there too, so you can do a little bit of exploring and see how maybe you fit into their company or vice versa, right? Female breeders, let's make it happen. Speak up.
Yes.
What else to say on that? we like you said, like maybe we can see a big picture kind of thing, a little bit, or a different perspective when it comes to breeding would be lovely in the market, I think. And Tawnie, thank you so much for everything. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us and for all of that legislature work that you've done and will probably continue to do. Thank you. Thank you for advocating for this plant. Appreciate it. I appreciate it. And of course, yeah. So I have to say, I don't know, actually, I don't think Joey and Mitch would be mad if I didn't say, but like, subscribe, like all those good things, please. Like RMR loves working with people like Tawnie and everywhere in between. So reach out if you are looking for any kind of cannabis, CBD, or otherwise content. They're wonderful people. I'd love to interview you, whatever it is. Tawnie, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. And I'll keep following you on LinkedIn. So excited to see what happens next.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin.
You're welcome. Okay.